to Mindshift, a PLCS Empowerment Collective podcast. I am Christopher, one of your hosts.
And I'm Deb Anderson, your other host. Welcome, everyone.
And today's topic is one that I find myself talking about all of the time, even though I know nothing about it, and that's sleep.
If you scroll Instagram or any other platform like that, it seems like everyone is talking about needing to get enough rest and needing to get enough sleep. And I don't think that has always been the case. So what do you think's going on?
It's funny, social media is all about the algorithms, right? And it's funny to me that that's what your social media is showing you, because my social media is showing me, here's how to get away with only sleeping for 3 hours, and giving me the opposite. And that's because I love my sleep. I do my darndest to get 8 to 9 hours of sleep every night. And I'm really excited to have an expert here with us today to talk about sleep. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Connie Schnoes. I am a psychologist at Boys Town, and one of my first clinical loves is working with kids and families on sleep.
Connie, has that always been the case? Because I feel like sleep is a relatively new focus for people. So how long have you been doing this?
My baby is 30, and I got into it when he was 3.
So for a bit, for a while.
What has changed in what you've learned about it for the last 27 years?
Nothing has changed. I've learned more about it in the last 27 years, but what's true about how it ends up going for most people in our society really hasn't shifted, which is unfortunate because it needs to shift.
Okay, so we were just talking about, some people think or feel like they need 8 to 9 hours of sleep. I read a long time ago that Martha Stewart said she only needed 4 hours of sleep a night, and that's how she got everything done. Is there any truth to that?
As I think about that statement, it's actually very scary because all of the research we have would say that if you're getting less than 8 hours of sleep, you really are causing impairment for yourself in so many ways that you don't realize. We think we're fine.
What are those impairments, Connie? What are you seeing?
If you are sleeping less than 7 hours consistently, you are going to be operating as though you have a 0.08 blood alcohol level. And you have no realization that that's what's happening. So your response time is different. Your processing time is slow. Less than 7 hours of sleep makes you 50 to 60% more likely to contract colds and viruses when you're exposed. Same person exposed the same way, getting more than 7 to 8 hours is very much unlikely to get the cold. So there's so many things.
What about long term?
People who sleep less than 6 hours, we have more recent research that says they are at much higher risk for cancer and dementia.
I feel like this is the $1 million question then. And how do we get more or better sleep?
So there's a lot of things that can play into that. But the first thing would be to make sure you're protecting at least 8 hours of time in bed, if not 8.5, because technically, if you're getting a sufficient total amount of sleep time, when you go to bed, it should take about 15 to 20 minutes to fall asleep. So if you're only allowing yourself 8 hours in bed, you're not going to get 8 hours of sleep, right? So healthy sleep onset takes a little bit, takes a hot minute for your brain and body to do what they're supposed to do. If you're hitting the pillow and you're out, which is what people want most of the time, you aren't getting enough sleep. So number one, protect the sleep time and protect that schedule every day.
Connie, does it change over time as from younger ages to older ages, the amount of sleep that you need?
Yes, infants, toddlers, they definitely need more sleep. By the age of 4, kids need 11 hours of sleep. By age 10, they need 10 hours of sleep. By 17, you need 9. But from the time you hit 17 on, 9 truly is the recommendation. Doesn't matter how old you are. There was historical sort of messaging that older adults need less sleep. That's not true. So it's a very gradual reduction in total sleep time.
So it's interesting to hear that. I have a now officially 4.5-year-old, and he has been a great sleeper, which we're so lucky that that's the case. But you mentioned that basically kids in their teens should still be getting, I think you said 10 hours of sleep?
From the age of 10 to the age of 17, you're only losing 1 hour.
And that, I I don't have a teenager, okay, but I remember when I was a teen, and I remember talking to teens that I know today, and I feel like that's not happening.
For a lot of teens, it can't happen, especially during the school year. Minnesota, couple of decades ago, statewide instituted a late school start time for teenagers. Kind of the flip-flop of what we do in this area, where elementary starts at 9 and teenagers have a 0 hour at 6 or 6:30 in the morning. The little kids are actually more awake and alert and ready to go. Teenagers, truly, their circadian rhythm that governs their sleep-wake sort of 24-hour cycle, they truly aren't awake and alert till like 9 a.m. And Minnesota recognized that. So they said, well, kids will just stay up later, they'll get less sleep. That's not true. They are getting more sleep and they're doing better academically because they are getting the sleep they need.
So when you work with families, I know you're a psychologist and you work with kids and families, and sleep is an issue. What do you recommend?
It depends on the issue we're having. For the vast majority of kids, doesn't really matter if they're young or older kids, total sleep time is generally too short. It's pretty rare that I have any age kid that is getting a sufficient amount of sleep. That's pretty rare. So number one, increasing sleep. Now, what's getting in the way of that total sleep time is the rest of the things that we have to address. And that can be related to sleep hygiene. That can be related to how the kids have learned to fall asleep, like all kinds of things. And so we're addressing all of that as well. I mean, I'll work with kids on, all right, do you think you can pull off 10:30? Like, can we get you 15 minutes or a half an hour on either end? Do you really need an hour to get ready for school in the morning, or can we squeak a 30 minutes out of that for extending your total sleep time? So I look for places to make that so we can optimize the actual amount of sleep they can get.
I feel like I heard something in what you said, that it comes down to like duration of sleep or something like that is really what it comes down to. And so telling a kid, well, you have to go to bed earlier isn't going to help if they're not able to fall asleep, because then they're just laying in bed not sleeping. But if they can you trick your rhythm? Can you change your rhythm? Like, if they started going to bed at 9 o'clock every day, is that going to help?
No, not. There are things that can help you get in sync, get your rhythm in sync. But trying to shift your rhythm against what it's naturally doing is not necessarily helpful. Like, so if you travel and you cross time zones, does your body ultimately catch up? It can. It'll take about a day per hour of time zone shift for it to make that shift, but your whole life is shifting that way, right? Like, everything's shifting, not just time to bed and time to up. And so when I have kids who have a sleep phase delay, so like they aren't falling asleep till 3 or 4 in the morning, can they make that happen? Sure, they can, because they stay up too late. It doesn't mean they're getting the kind of sleep they should be getting, even if they sleep for 8 hours, because the sleep process really is, if you miss it, you lose it. And so if you stay up, if your normal bedtime's 11 p.m. and you don't go to bed till 2 a.m., you just sacrifice the first half of your sleep cycle, like you just did. And so it's important to have a consistent schedule. If it gets off like that, can I get them back into the rhythm it's supposed to be? Yes. What you were looking for is maximizing the sleep window they do have. And having them go to bed and not fall asleep will cause way more problems, especially if you have an anxious kid. And I do have anxious kids, teenagers who try to go to bed early, and I'm like, and they lay there and worry because they're not ready to fall asleep. And they're worried about they're not going to fall asleep. Like, it's this little perpetual cycle or circle, if you will. And so helping them learn to manage that and actually get in bed at a time that makes more sense so they can fall asleep in a healthy amount of time matters. But if there's other things that they're doing during the day or as a part of their sleep hygiene that's not good, that's getting in the way of actually falling asleep, we can address all those things as well. But it's maximizing that window.
Are you noticing that when, again, I'm thinking of what you do for a living, when kids don't get enough sleep, it's affecting their anxiety or their depression or other mental health symptoms?
All of it. All of it. We are way less equipped to cope. And again, the sleep helps us do that. One of the things we've learned about REM sleep is if we've had a challenging event, we are likely to, at some point, dream about those events. And while we're dreaming, the chemicals that produce that emotional response are suppressed. That's the only time in 24 hours those chemicals are suppressed. So you're able to process that experience without the emotional experience. And so the next day, you can address and approach and deal with that in a way less emotional manner. So whether that's a clinical response to real anxiety provoking or just a day-to-day life experience, like sleep helps us see, interpret, manage everything the next day better.
Do you think one of those things that affects their sleep hygiene is caffeinating?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, research would say no caffeine within 9 hours of when you want to fall asleep.
It's funny to me because I feel like when I was a kid, coffee was just something that my dad took in a thermos to work, right? Like that's all it was. That's all I knew about it. And I actually have never had coffee before. And I only drank tea, some caffeinated tea for maybe a year and a half or so when I was an early parent, because I do get 8 to 9 hours of sleep every night. But what astonishes me is that kids are walking around with their Starbucks drinks. And sometimes, yes, it is 90% sugar and 10% coffee, but it freaks me out a little bit when I'm like, what are you drinking? Why? Why do you? Oh, because I need to be awake.
Or Mountain Dew. I mean, it's the pop too, Mountain Dew and Coke. And, I'm sitting here with my Diet Coke and I'm thinking, oh my God, I've already missed the window. But what it made me wonder about though, Connie, is meds. Like, does it help to take medication to sleep?
It really doesn't. It really doesn't.
Not even in the short term.
No. The research we have would say for some people, typically elderly, medication might be indicated. The other population would be folks with PTSD, typically veterans who are having a really hard time with nightmares because that neurochemical I talked about is not suppressed for folks who have PTSD. So they are really reliving their experiences with the emotion. And there's actually a high blood pressure medication that helps inhibit that neurochemical and allows them to not have the nightmares anymore, allows them to dream without all of the emotional reactions that go with that. Otherwise, no. People are very misinformed about melatonin. Our body naturally produces melatonin. Independent of our circadian rhythm, it produces melatonin. Those two things come together to facilitate falling asleep. Melatonin is not a sedative. It's just a message to the brain that we're getting ready to go to sleep. Doesn't keep you sleeping. And the long-term, the research we have would say if you're using it, you need a very small amount, like less than a milligram. And the other scary thing about over-the-counter melatonin is whatever amount they're saying is in those bottles can be anywhere from 40% of what's in those bottles to 500% more what they say on the label, because it's not FDA regulated. So you don't really know what you're taking.
So, Connie, I said at the beginning of the episode that I was excited about this topic because I don't know anything about it, but it's something I do literally every day. And I feel like you have my head spinning right now, and I have so many more questions. And so I'm wondering if our listeners might be feeling the same. If it's okay with you, I would love to invite our listeners to send in some questions, and then we could do a second part with them and follow up with you on that. What do you think?
I think that'd be awesome. The more I can help people understand the importance of sleep and how to get it, I am all in.
Well, I love that. So if you have a question about sleep and you want to send it in to us, you can send that question to communications@plcschools.org. And I'll make sure that email address is in the show notes for today's episode. So you can find that at plcschools.org/mindshift. But again, if you have a question about sleep, go ahead and send that over to communications@plcschools.org. And we will do, probably a couple weeks, we'll do a second part here and we'll talk some more about sleep and address those questions.
That'll be great.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really eye-opening episode for me. We'll leave it at that and say to be continued. Thank you, listeners at home, for listening to Mindshift. And if you enjoyed today's episode, Make sure you follow us or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and check us out at plcschools.org/mindshift for more content. And we'll be back soon to talk more about sleep.